Karolin, thanks very much for your time today. I know you're an expert in business model innovation, ecosystems, circular economy, and no doubt more. And I wanted to delve into your sort of latest thinking, research, and practice on those themes. And perhaps start with the world of digital transformation in that context, which you've spoken and written about a lot. You said that actually the transformation doesn't require cutting edge technology, it doesn't require just digitizing like products and services. It requires that great word, holistic transformation. Could you explain what that means in layperson's terms, in terms of where do you start and what are the critical aspects of that, if you like, transformation process?
Yeah, for me, transformation is kind of this holistic, fundamental transformation, which means that companies often think, okay, it's sufficient if I come up with a new technology, etc. But this is not true. Transformation really means the holistic transformation in a sense of, okay, you really need to rethink your business model. You really need to rethink how you do business. What does it mean? How do I serve my customers? Which activities do I do on my own? Which do I do together with other companies in sort of an ecosystem? How do I capture value in this whole new system where a lot of customers expect things are for free and things like that? And how do I, and what is my value proposition? How do I create value? So it's really about this fundamental change in what does my company do? And a lot of companies do not get that because they think, okay, if I engage in AI or something like that, that's already sufficient, but that's not sufficient because it's important, for sure it's important. So, but it's much more important to really fundamentally think about what is the impact of AI on my business and what does it mean for my business model. And therefore, I think they should start with the business model and then think about, okay, how do I get the technology and what do I need in order to fundamentally change my business model? Or also the other way around, so if this technology is there, how would that influence my business model? But you should always combine it with the fundamental thinking of your business model, which is then obviously tied to strategy and everything.
Of course, isn't that? Yeah, it's a fundamental part. So that makes eminent sense, and that sounds, very sensible. What gets in the way, from your experience, what gets in the way of people then doing that, rather than thinking of digital being a plug-in or an initiative or an AI experiment and so on? Fundamentally looking at business models in either perspective, what typically gets in the way of an executive doing that? Why wouldn't they just? It's
super challenging to do that. So it's easy to explain that on paper or in talks and all that, but to do that in the real world, it's super challenging. And I only know a few companies who really do that in an excellent way, because most of them, they understand it and they want to do that, but if they then try to implement it in their own company, they struggle or they fail doing it, because at the end, then they end up with some incremental changes of their business model, but they are not able to really come up with this fundamentally new business model. And I think the way it could work, or where I see companies succeeding in doing it, is that you always think about, okay, fundamentally different way of doing the business. So you really separate it from your core business. So you kind of improve your core business with digital processes, which you also need to do, but on the other hand, then you really start something kind of on a green field and see it as a totally separated business. And then maybe over time the businesses come together, or maybe they stay separated, but we really need to start it as a separated entity, a separated project kind of.
I see quite a few businesses trying to create that greenfield site, or perhaps do a partnership with a third party to get some new knowledge and so on. And they sort of keep and then the question is, what's the relationship with the core business in terms of people, incentives, and so on. But then sometimes it sort of dilutes back over time. They've had their 6 months or a year to experiment, and it sort of gets diluted back, or it becomes really slow, and they're not quite sure what to do with the core, because the core is the duller bit. How do they manage the sort of that connectivity between the two? What the few companies that get it right? How do they manage that? Either synergy, if there is one, or a connection, or actually if there's separation, depending on the dynamics of their business. How do they do it?
Yeah, it's both. So it's separation, but then you also need the integration. So you need to have the linkages, either like the people that get together and that they meet regularly, especially on a senior team level, or ideally you take someone of the core business who then kind of leads the new business, so that this person can make the connection to the core business. So it's really a lot about the whole soft skills. How do you lead the teams? How do you make sure they interact? How do you incentivize also kind of this interaction? So some companies then also kind of offer internships, that people from the old business can kind of do an internship in the new business and vice versa. So there is this continuous interaction. But that's important. And I'm actually writing a paper right now that I'm really a top academic paper that I try to publish in one of the top journals. And one of the key results there is we talk about autonomy, we talk about structural differentiation, all that is important, but if you don't get this link right between the core business and the new business, you will fail. Albeit you'll have autonomy and you have structural differentiation. So it really shows that this linkage is very important. And I think this is something underestimated by a lot of companies, because they know, okay, we need to separate, we need to give them autonomy and everything like that. But if you only do that, then you have this crazy crowd of people, they do something, but it never really adds to your overall strategy and to your overall kind of way forward. And this is interesting.
No, fascinating. And you in some ways you've got to get the structures right, but the connectivity right. And then you talked about the soft stuff. And if I generalize to that being the sort of the leadership, the incentives, the people aspects. What I see is more and the culture. And you see more and more, if you like, strategy professors, well, whatever their badge, strategy, innovation. I know it's different, but that moving into or collaborating with the organizational behavior sort of group as well. Do you see that trend as well, or is that something you decide?
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's at the end it comes down to the people and to the soft stuff. It sounds a bit that it's not important, but it's super important. It's
So
and
you
can have the
enabler.
best strategy, but if you don't get it, your people standing behind it and your people wanting that change, then the best strategy is useless.
And I see that you have to sort of think about those sorts of factors right from the beginning, rather than it being the sort of, if you like, given our consulting history, the last slide of the deck, the culture slide, which you always use the last slide, is right from the beginning. You talked earlier about ecosystems, and more and more organizations are playing a role in digital ecosystems, whatever role, orchestrator, supplier, partner, and so on. My observation is some, not all of them, some are still, if you like, developing their strategies as though they are vertically integrated, not in an ecosystem. So their business is in an or many ecosystems, in fact. But their strategy process is still very closed within the organization. I'm not saying it has to be an open strategy process, but how does the development of ecosystems and companies' participation in them change, in your view, the way they think about either top level strategy or business model innovation? How does it change it?
Well, I think a lot of companies are still experimenting with it. So they want to be part of an ecosystem, but on the other hand side, they are not really open to change the whole, which is what you mentioned, the whole supply chain structure, because they think this should still be in place. But on the other hand side, they want to be a big partner or a big player in the ecosystem. So that means if they want to play in ecosystem, they also need to be open to change the whole way the supply chain works, and who is responsible for what and who can decide what. And these are also the challenges in the ecosystem, that everyone wants to decide, but this is kind of also challenging, and who kind of is really then the one who decides what to do. So this is one thing. And the other point is, again, brings me back to the business model. They also need to change their business model, which kind of entails the supply chain and everything. So because only then participating in an ecosystem makes sense, because otherwise it's not an ecosystem, it's a partnership or a strategic alliance, which we also had in the past. So if you play in an ecosystem, you really need to be open to create value together, and not creating you a piece of the value and then handing it over to the next one, and then he adds kind of.
It's a big shift in mindset, isn't it? Because if I worked for one organization that, so we did two things, and one was to actually map and work out where they were creating value in various ecosystems, and they were capable, I can't say which one, but it was a capable company in the technology sector, but they actually didn't know fully all of their roles and parts. They didn't have one map, if you like, of all their ecosystems. So they didn't actually know which was the most important. They sort of named the top 2 or 3, and you said, well, there's other 3 over there which create 10% of value, and they hadn't quite worked it out. I mean, they could work it out eventually, it wasn't top of their mind. So there's one, keeping a picture of it. And secondly, where they were thinking about their sort of medium-term plan, I said, so what's the role of your ecosystem partners in the development of this plan? At least discussing, discussing where you can create value. And it was sort of involved, but it was very much at the back end of the process. Once they'd figured it out, they would then effectively, talk to them about it. I guess one question that you've looked at is, we talked about value, and obviously concepts of value are evolving to sort of beyond shareholder value, more responsible forms of capital, especially at the moment, given what's going on in parts of the world. And I guess you've looked at particularly the circular economy as an I would call it as an aspect of responsible capitalism. How does that again? How does that concept and practice of being in a circular economy change the way that, in your view, the best organisations think about innovation, think about their own strategy? Because some players don't play any role in the circular economy at all, rightly or wrongly. Yeah. Others do. How does that change, if at all, the way they think about strategy and actually execute it in practice?
Well, it also, again, fundamentally changes the way they do business, because if you want to engage in circular economy, you really need to be here again open to change kind of a lot and to kind of question your fundamental beliefs and how you source material, how you create value, how you make sure that the resources are brought back in the circle. And here you need to, again, and it's all a bit related, kind of business models, ecosystem, circular economy, because if you want to put a circular economy into practice, you cannot do that on your own. You need partners in order to realize that, because and you need to work together with them right from the beginning when you design a product, because you need to design a product in a way that is modular, and modular is also part of the ecosystem thinking. That modularity is the thing you need in order to make ecosystems work, and this is the same for circular economy, because only if the products are modular, then afterwards you can kind of take them apart and reuse materials of them and bring them back into the circle. So it again needs this openness to be willing to change your business model, trust in the collaboration with partners, trust in the co-creation of value with partners, trust in the fact that you are not the one who decides everything, but that you are kind of dependent on your partners. And so this is, and then it's also related to, okay, how can I, to business model innovation, how can I make sure that our customers are also willing to go for this circular economy, because maybe the product is more expensive and maybe it doesn't have the same convenience or not, but then you need to relate it to some forms of excitement of the customer, and then it's related to sharing or something like that, that products are not sold to the customer, but they are just rented to the customer, and then the customer brings it back so that it is brought back into the circle. Yes. Another interesting thing is that, which a lot of people get wrong, so that circularity is not necessarily, that's not sufficient, let's put it that way. So even if you are managed to close the circle, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're more sustainable. Because if you close the circle, it's one thing, but the second step is you need to make sure that the circle is sustainable per se, so that you do not use more CO2 by closing the circle, that you do not use toxic material and stuff like that. So this is something a lot of people don't get right. So they close the circle, but then the circle is not per se sustainable.
It's necessary but not sufficient condition.
But then in addition to being circular and being sustainable, you need to make sure that the customers still appreciate the product that you have. And a lot of companies struggle with that, because then they say, okay, my product is more expensive, and customers are not willing to buy that stuff, because although everyone says, okay, the planet is so important, at the end, it's the price that matters.
I remember having a great conversation with Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, and he talked about some of these concepts, and obviously being a big pioneer, and controversial moves he had to make at certain times, like, for example, stopping quarterly reporting because of the pressure he was getting from shareholders, in order to take longer term bets and investments. But also the fact that ultimately, if customers didn't, as you said, if his customers didn't value particularly sustainability of his products, and valued both what they were doing and how they'd pay a price premium or something, then ultimately he wouldn't have the funding to support the innovation he was trying to pursue in that. Just going back to
just one addition, that the shareholder thinking, I think, is also super interesting, because this is a lot what I hear from companies or from my executive students. Well, yeah, we would do it, but we cannot do it because our shareholders don't want it, especially for the big companies like the Nestle's, and they all say, yeah, the shareholder puts so much pressure on us that we are not, in good times, yes, we can do some sustainability, but as soon as it gets a bit tougher, then this topic is out of the boardroom. So then it's only about profitability, and then sustainability is back in the edge where it used to be. So and this is something, I'm not sure if we are there yet to really change it. Like Unilever, they were able to do it. If you have strong people in the executive team or in the board, then you're able to do it. And family-owned companies, they are also able to change it. But a lot of those shareholder-driven companies are still kind of in a different thinking mode.
I think it is a greater challenge, I guess. It depends on how the story of the business and what it's there to do is communicated and articulated, and whether the investors firstly want to invest in that type of business. I think that you referred to trust quite a lot. Trust is important for shareholders in terms of the ethical aspects of trust, because we've seen many examples where companies made bad brand decisions, for example, in their supply chain or their sourcing, which can come back to bite their brand and their shareholders. And ultimately, whether they want to take a medium-term view or whether they're up for a quick turn or a quick buck from it. And I just want to turn back to the discussion of ecosystems. And we've seen the big platforms within ecosystems, many of them doing very well over the last few months for obvious reasons, as we worked virtually and I think delivered. That's a classic example. Now, there's obviously a whole train of activity on the regulation of the platforms and the hearing last week. But it begs the question, and that's a sort of fascinating debate, but not one I'm particularly focusing on at the moment. But if you look back then into ecosystems where you have stronger platforms who are playing the orchestrator type role in ecosystems, I just wonder what you're observing or researching in large platform-based sort of ecosystems in terms of what the other players are doing. Are they effectively saying, actually, we see benefit in staying in that ecosystem, even if we get a benefit of scale, even if sometimes the terms get worse, depending on the degree of power from the platform, or whether they're actually saying, you know what, it's time for us to exit or look to a different deal like a partnership or alliance. It's a big trend, this growth of the big platforms. I just wonder if there's any examples you've come across or you're fascinated by where you're seeing organizations within it effectively making different or considering or making different strategic moves as a result of that shift.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really have a clear answer here. I think it really depends on which role are you playing in this platform. Obviously, everyone wants to be the orchestrator and the platform owner, but this is obviously not possible. So I think when you have a unique value proposition or a unique position in this ecosystem, then it's you have a good life, put it that way, because if it's then you can have a good role in this ecosystem, and you can you have some power to negotiate also kind of the rules and the terms and everything. But if you are just one player out of many that is interchangeable, then it's pretty difficult. And then most companies, if you're in this situation, then they are thinking about moving out of this platform. But if you would be kind of the only supplier of, I don't know, automotive equipment, and you are kind of the unique player because you are the one who really provides the material on time and for a good price, then you can still have a decent life in this platform. And I think this is something companies need to start thinking about it, because so in the past, the whole discussion was always about how can I create a platform? How can I be the platform owner? But now the platforms exist and the platforms are defined. So now it's too late to really think of, okay, I create a new platform. That doesn't make sense. Now companies really need to think about, okay, how can I play a role in this platform that makes me unique and that makes me kind of so powerful that I can still kind of negotiate the terms, and it's not only something where I'm a commodity product kind of.
Yeah, and you'd have to have
possibilities.
You'd have to be a pretty strong brand and business to switch away from a big platform, if you like, that you're working to. I mean, in the world that I spend time in terms of TV, Disney Plus has stepped out of the Netflix ecosystem, but then Disney has a massive brand, well capitalized, big stock of, and effectively it's weighted. This is my view. It's weighted until the point where the particular product, on-demand TV, has become the norm, and then said, actually, we don't need to be on that platform anymore. We can create our own. So there's a timing question, but there's also hey, we're big enough. We can create our own. There aren't many Disneys around in most ecosystems.
That's true. Yeah.
Or the
other way around, or you find a way, if you are we had this with insurance companies, that they said, okay, we do multi-homing, we are part of many platforms, and on each of those platforms, we kind of add our value. And this is then also interesting that you are the player that can be part of many platforms, and you kind of know how to navigate those platforms. And this could also be a value proposition for a company. I'm not the creator of the platform, but I'm part of all those platforms. I always provide insurance for movies, watchers or whatever, or for car rental platforms or for whatever. And you always plug onto those platforms, and then this could also be very interesting.
Yeah, and I guess you'd have to have something, as you said, particularly unique about your proposition that everybody wants, And I guess very practically, be very easy to do business with if you're doing lots of deals. These things, negotiating deals and contracts, which I've done a reasonable amount of, can take a lot. It's one of those new topics everybody wants to get involved in, and it can take months and months and months. In some ways, they've got to have that modularity of plug and play relatively quickly.
Absolutely.
Last question from me is, in the time, whether virtually or physically, you would have attended seminars, conferences, academic conferences, the sort of, I guess, the Thinkers 50 type shows, as well as obviously spending your time with corporate clients. Apart from your own brilliant work over the last, say, year, when you've left those events, what were and you thought, wow, that was I love that concept or that idea. Not necessarily that finished, but sort of a theme that you think, oh, that deserves more research, or that theme deserves more consideration. But it's sort of, I call it a turn the head moment. You think, wow, that was smart or clever. Were there any moments like that in the last year where you thought, that's an emerging topic that's worthy of consideration?
Good question. Difficult question, yeah, because I listened to a lot of inspiring talks and stuff like that. Maybe one that stood out is the one by Bob Chapman. I don't know if you know him. He's kind of
no.
US citizen, and he runs this own company, Barry V. Miller, which is a small company, or not so small, but medium-sized company. And what he does is kind of this concept of human-centered leadership. And the presentation, how he shared it with us, was really inspirational, and he had this one sentence, and he's pretty famous, was the sentence they said, okay, everyone is another one's precious child. So which means when we have employees, then these people are a precious child of someone, and therefore they deserve that we care about them, and that we take, that we do a lot, that they feel comfortable in their job, because we spend 8 hours a day together, well, not during Corona, but typically. And so they should deserve this attention, and they should deserve the love that typically parents would give them. And I like that, because at the end it comes back to people and to the relationship between people, and therefore I really like this. Everyone is another one's precious child. I kind of like that. There's also a TED talk of him on YouTube if you're interested in it.
No, I'll definitely look at that, and that appeals to me. I think you can be commercially successful and caring of your people. I think the two can go together.
And his concept made him really successful. So it was on the one hand side, obviously he has a great strategy, but on the other hand side, it's also kind of this culture that they have in their organization, which makes them really unique. And then he presented it as like he doing that and implementing that, and he had a lot of great examples of people where they measure their success based on how much they change the life of people, and I like that. So this, well, he said that obviously it's probably not their most important KPI, but I don't believe that entirely, but he said it's their most important KPI, which is obviously not necessarily true, because they will probably definitely measure EBIT and things like that, but at least they think about that. So how much do I influence the life of my employees in a positive way?
Yeah, it's a great way to anchor in that sense of purpose-led sort of strategy.
Yeah, exactly. And that was probably the most inspiring.
That sounds amazing. That's a fantastic example. You said a difficult question. You found that very easy. I'm really grateful for your time, Karolin.